Hello and welcome to Australia in Space TV. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the editor with My Security Media. Today we're joined by Max Scott, the CTO with Strat Alliance Global. Max, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful. And look, we're going to be having and hosting you in Perth for the Indo-Pacific Robotics, Autonomy, AI and Cyber Conference and Exhibition, 7th to the 8th of October. So just a few short weeks away. And your specialty is on the responsible application of AI and those frameworks that govern AI. Maybe let's start with your background and where you are in the US. Actually, I'm as it happens, I'm in Boston this particular week, so we're both on US time. But yeah, where will you be travelling from for Perth?
Sure. So I'm out in Seattle right now, where it's typically rainy, but today it's quite sunny and nice, and I hope I can bring some of this good weather with me when I head out to Perth.
Nice. Yeah, maybe introduce us to your background, and I think that'll introduce us to where you're going to fit into the program.
Absolutely. So about 10 years ago, I joined the US Department of State in what was a small team focused on technology policy. Over my time at the Department of State, it then grew to a 100-person Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Technologies. And early on, I saw the importance of AI as a socio-technical issue. And I quickly became one of the State Department's lead negotiators for AI. This included me going out to negotiate agreements such as the EU AI Act and talking about AI at the G20 and bringing countries together in ASEAN. When I had the opportunity to take that work and join Microsoft as one of the early members of their responsible AI team, I jumped. And at Microsoft, I was able to build on my understanding of global regulatory landscapes to help Microsoft understand how to develop and deploy these technologies responsibly. This was right before the advent of ChatGPT, so I got to see the entire AI evolution that Microsoft has underwent in the last couple years. Bridging these two experiences together, I've now launched a new organization called Strat Alliance Global, and we help governments and organizations who are working with governments to understand the global regulatory landscape and build out frameworks that can help them develop and deploy these technologies responsibly. It's some of the most mission critical and sensitive applications that governments and their organization that they work with have.
Well, you mentioned mission critical. Where do you find it's currently at? Do you find that the guardrail approach is the right way? And I also see that there's a bit of a nuance around the language where we heard a lot about, ethics in AI, but now it's more responsible applications of AI. Yeah, where do you find, or is there, and is there a sort of a preferred framework, but is it the language of guardrails and responsible use of AI? Is there a sort of a benchmark approach that you tend to have? Or is it a little bit more nuanced in where it's being applied and what industry or sector it's being applied to?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's a bit more nuanced. It depends on what type of industry you're in. Healthcare is very interested in looking at fairness and the extent to which they're engaging different types of populations. Banking industry is looking more at audits and how they can have traceability to their issues and some of the concerns that they are working on. So it really depends on which industry you're looking at in terms of how you categorize the responsible AI concerns. But the concerns are all the same, regardless of which industry, and that's fairness, traceability, human rights, privacy, and just general safety of these systems if you're going to embody them into a piece of robotics or an autonomous agent. So it's really like you need to think about the context of each deployment. And that's one thing that the organizations that I've worked with have always done is we've thought about context-specific deployments. You mentioned language, which is a really important issue to think about as it relates to responsible AI. A lot of the responsible AI systems that are being developed and deployed, they're being developed and deployed in the US or in Europe or in Australia. And these are English-speaking countries, and they end up being English-speaking models. So when you then develop and you deploy them in non-English-speaking contexts, they run into these issues of fairness and bias, and their deployments end up having risks or vulnerabilities that were not originally anticipated. And that's where the importance of inclusion comes in for responsible AI, and where if you're developing and deploying in a specific location that's beyond where you're developing and deploying the AI application or model, you need to be engaging those populations and bringing in their cultural values so that you're avoiding the vulnerabilities and the risks that can be posed when you're developing and deploying those systems in contexts that are beyond what the people who have originally made those systems come from.
I suppose another one is in the terms of the conference in itself is looking at robotics, and we'll cover things like drones and swarm technology, where this is machine learning and autonomous computing built onto physical platforms. Also
Yep.
versus, and you mentioned things like privacy, which is probably more aligned to things like large language models and how it accesses data. Do you find that the approach is different between those, say, physical systems and then data-related systems? Is there a difference there that the audience might want to be aware of, or is there a different form of thinking?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I'd sort of tie it back to the overall framework of the concerns, which are spelled out in things like the OECD best practices for responsible AI, is generally the same. So you want to think about how an AI system is affecting privacy, regardless of whether it's in a drone or whether it's in a banking audit application or a healthcare system. But for things that have what we call an embodied AI system, these would be things like a drone or a swarm technology where there's a physical form. The piece that ends up becoming most important as it relates to responsible AI is human oversight. And that's where you're measuring and you're understanding the risks as it relates to each action that an embodied AI system takes. And this helps you to ensure safety in that type of AI system. And I will say there's a lot of innovation that's happening as it relates to robotics and safety in AI systems, primarily in the manufacturing sector, where robotics are being used to do things like manufacture cars or manufacture different parts or infrastructure. And the developers who are working with those systems are starting to think about how you have human oversight throughout the supply chain and throughout the development ecosystem that relates to those types of technologies. So for those technologies, I'd say human oversight is probably the biggest piece.
Nice. Well, look, there's no doubt you've got a great contribution to have, given the context of the conference as well, the Indo-Pacific Robotics, Autonomy, AI and Cyber Conference. It is literally compiled and the program put together to deal with all of these issues, and it's great to have a focus there on responsible AI. I'll highlight one of the sessions that you're involved with on the panel is the legal horizons and responsible AI, navigating regulation, risk and responsibility, and we've only just touched the surface of the discussions that we'll be able to have as we host you in Perth on the 7th to 8th of October, just next month. So, Max Scott, a pleasure to cross to you from Boston to Seattle as we lead up to the conference in Perth. You're the CTO with Strat Alliance Global. I look forward to seeing you in a few short weeks. And thanks for joining us on Australia in Space TV.
Yeah, thank you so much, and looking forward to joining for the conference as well. See you all there.